Greetings! This week on Speculative Tolkienism, we make heroic attempts to at last put the Rings of Power behind us and move on to our original objective, i.e. to do an extended deep dive on Tolkien's original texts. We tried to do this, but alas, the discussion of the Rings of Power still kept creeping into the conversation. For the more we read of Tolkien's original texts, the more the Rings of Power seemed to be wanting, lacking, or just plain lame. This week, we begin with the Lord of the Rings prologue, in which we find that the Harfoots were not nomadic at all, and that the big book they carried would have been anachronistic because the early tribes of hobbits almost certainly passed their lore down via an oral tradition. In this episode, we explore the consequences of this tradition and the consequences of the Rings of Power ignoring that tradition. We also look into a question of the revised Hobbit in which Tolkien made Gollum more subjugated by the Rings' power, which was clearly necessitated by the writing of the Lord of the Rings. The prologue answers many of these questions that we asked ourselves in Speculative Tolkienism Episode 1. We are happy to set the record straight today. So let's light the goblin barkers.
I would like to talk about concerning hobbits. How about that?
Okay. Yeah. So we reread Concerning Hobbits. For me, it's been 15 years or so since I read Lord of the Rings.
Oh, I thought it was Concerning Hobbits. It's really prologue.
Yeah, one thing that I noticed, not to talk about Rings of Power again,
okay,
but
let's dive
real
in.
quick.
Let's dive in.
Here it is in Concerning Hobbits, and it says right in that middle paragraph that starts, the Harfoots had much to do with dwarves in ancient times, so this is about Harfoots. Mm-hmm. And then midway through that paragraph, they were the most normal and representative variety of Hobbit. This is the Harfoots. They were the most inclined to settle in one place and longest preserve their ancient or their ancestral habits of living in tunnels and holes.
Can I expand on that?
Of course,
thing too?
Yeah.
Okay, so what was pointed out was that the hobbits were very, like, they're steeped in oral traditions. They did not have anything written down.
Wait, is that in Concerning Hobbits?
Yeah, look at the end of this, not in Concerning Hobbits. It's in the prologue, though.
At the end of the Third Age, the part played by the hobbits in the great events that led to the inclusion of the Shire in the reunited kingdom awakened among them a more widespread interest in their own history, and many of their traditions up to that time, still mainly oral, right, were collected and written down.
Again, so that...
Boom!
And this is in the appendices, so they could have used this. Now, I mean...
so could they have used the prologue material?
They might have been able to. I don't know.
Yeah,
but the point is, but they did not have to even reference the prologue material. Because, and again, I just think it would have been a little bit more deep. Reciting the people's names, the remembrance on the trail, right? Then it would have had a little bit more impact. This is important to, to the tradition of the history of this clan of Harfoots. I mean,
right.
And again, it I don't think it affected where they went in the story, but I think if they would have done the oral history and it would have given a sense of if Sadak dies, who is going to carry on this tradition? And then now you've got...
That's a great point. We've said before, the Harfoots didn't seem to give a shit about each other, even though they said they did. They didn't really when push came to shove. Like when Sadak was dying, they just kind of stared at the sunset and smiled. It was creepy almost. This elderly, figure, the leader of your tribe or whatever, is dying, and everyone's just kind of like, oh, all right, with a shrug. I question the showrunners decision to depict the Harfoots that way. The showrunners need to know that in order to make a good series, we as the audience need to be invested. And when we see that these creatures, these characters aren't even invested in each other or themselves, like they don't even give a shit about themselves, then why should we care about it? So like you just said, so you made a great point. Like if Sadak had been, you know, the movie, like, or the book Fahrenheit 451.
I do.
Yes. It's like, the people
I burned
become,
I burned
that.
Yeah, I burned that book.
I burnt that book.
No, but the people want anybody to read that.
The people become the vessels of knowledge in that story, and so when you have a human being that is like the holder, this receptacle of all the lore of that tribe, then there's something really crucial about him or her either staying alive or passing that lore down. Right.
And the point is that, like, a premature death like that. I mean, granted, he was an older Harfoot, right? Older gentleman. But if he would have been, there would have been a weight. There would have been like consequences to him dying. You know?
That's exactly my point. Like, there's the way they depicted it, it was like a shrug, like, oh, no big deal. The sun rises, the sun sets, people come and people go, no big deal.
And not to interrupt, but the way that they filmed their travels, the way that they filmed their migration, right? You really didn't see him leading or doing anything. There was no real kind of, there was no hierarchy, and even in like maybe that was intentional, where they didn't want there to like, oh, we're all in this together, kind of like, the perfect commune or something like that.
Right. It's an anarcho-syndicalist commune.
Oh, okay, I thought we were an anarcho-syndicalist commune.
We take it in turns to act as executive officer of the week.
But all the decisions of that office must be ratified by a 2/3 majority.
We're an autonomous collective.
You're fooling yourself. We're living in a dictatorship. Sorry.
Love that scene. Okay. It's so funny. Okay.
Anyway, so the point is, one, I think, but yeah, there was no consequence really to him.
There was no consequences, and so we as audiences, like, we don't have anything invested. But that would have been a great way to give more, like you said, more weight to that moment of his death, because all that knowledge in the oral tradition would have gone with him.
And then, but the thing is, like who better to carry that knowledge? Here you had little Nori, right?
Mm-hmm.
It could have been like if they wanted to go the whole female empowerment thing, which I'm all for. I don't care. You know what I'm saying?
I'm not.
I know. Well, but you know what I'm talking about. I mean, they could have made her
the receptacle of the oral tradition, right?
Right, where like Sadak could have been like, you need to find this, and all the answers will be made clear. Give her some kind of reason for going off into
everything needed a reason,
And look, I mean, the series isn't done yet, but there is no apparent reason that she's going off with
well, just like there's really no reason for them to migrate around and around. If they're not following the swallow, that's not migratory. But okay, so it might sound like to the uneducated listener that we are making way too big of a deal out of this idea of passing down. No, but I'm actually going to double down.
Okay, let's double down on this then.
Because
I got your back.
Right, good. Because it sounds like we're making a big deal out of this seemingly minor and inconsequential issue of an oral tradition and passing down the lore. The reason why I think it's important, and it should have been seen so by the people of the makers of Rings of Power, is that it was crucial to Tolkien, and it gave his world such a believability, because he went through meticulously and mapped out all the ways that all this lore could be compiled in the Red Book of Westmarch and then transcribed through the various ages, so that this lore came down from the remote mists of the past into like basically the modern world. So it there is a genealogy of the actual text that becomes published as Lord of the Rings. And speaking of that, the first episode of Speculative Tolkienism, back in episode 1, we talked at length about how there was this difference between the Riddles in the Dark before...
As it was originally written.
As it was originally written, and a revised Riddles in the Dark after Tolkien started writing Lord of the Rings and realizing, oh, shoot, this ring is much more consequential. Even that different, like most authors would be like, okay, well, hey, I just changed my mind. I changed the text, right?
Yeah. Well, modern day people would be like, people aren't even going to notice. So
Yeah.
you know what? Who cares? We're like, let's just roll through this.
But Tolkien, he's more of a writer than that. He has to not just write a story, but make it like actually real or believable in its textual genealogy. So he actually excused the fact that an earlier version of The Hobbit came out by basically blaming Bilbo and saying there were other versions of this tale, the early version that Bilbo told Gandalf, and later hands corrected his basic lie. Basically, he lied and transcribed the lie in the early version. And Frodo came along and said, "Oh, this is not how the Riddles of the Dark actually went down."
Can I ask you this? Where do you find this this seemingly impossible to find text?
Well, we actually had a hard time finding it in our episode 1, but it's right here where Tolkien goes. This account. Okay, so here's the big deal. This account, Bilbo set down in his memoirs, and he seems never to have altered it himself, not even after the Council of Elrond.
Evidently, it still appeared in the original Red Book, as it did in several of the copies and abstracts, but many copies contain the true account as an alternative, derived, no doubt, from notes by Frodo or Samwise. So there you accounted. Go. I mean, how cool? I mean, that is like awesome, though. I mean, how cool is that?
I know.
He went back.
He takes his own quote unquote mistake.
Yeah.
Or revision and like justifies it within the story itself.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, that is like one of the coolest things ever. And you know what? I mean, like, we missed it. You know what I'm saying? But
we missed it, and he explains it perfectly.
Yeah.
And so he takes what would normally be like a flaw, two different versions of an allegedly true, this mythology is supposed to be true, and you're just inventing it. It's not real. Tolkien's whole project was to make this as real as possible with maps and languages.
But do you think I don't even think I would have caught this had we not been talking about Riddles in the Dark?
Right.
You know what I'm talking about? It's like. Or if you don't know that chapter exists, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, or if you weren't really aware, he could just be okay. Probably when I was younger and I read this, I glanced over this preliminary material because I wanted to get to the story. Like, you don't need to read about concerning hobbits because you already know about hobbits, right?
Yeah, they green and yellow. What more do you need? They like
my eyes probably kind of glazed over at some point reading this because I'm like, okay, so there's different accounts and someone told someone else and it got transcribed. Boring, It's like, how boring to think that a book gets transcribed or whatever. But it's actually not boring now that I know that there were 2 actual published versions of The Hobbit, of Riddles in the Dark, and that this is like an account of why that's actually part of the whole mythology itself.
Yeah.
It's like, so like I said, he takes what would normally be like a crack in the believability, or a flaw in the believability of his legendarium, and he like creates more of the legendarium to account for this alleged flaw, so that it ceases to be a flaw and it turns into more of a proof that it's true.
Yeah,
it's so cool. Yeah.
What this does is it lays a foundational world, right? Like, he had rules and he had everything in place. So like everything that he told on top of that world, like that he laid over, the Lord of the Rings that he laid over, had a consistency. So it was believable. I mean, again, that's
right. And
that's what I think the biggest mistake that the showrunners for Rings of Power are doing is you have this rich world full of history, and it's like, just tell the story and stick to the rules. You know what I'm saying? Stick to the history,
right,
and tell the story within that. You don't have to tell that story, but you can tell something that references like this the history
consistent.
there. Don't make shit up, man.
Right.
You know
right.
what I'm saying? You can make anything up you want as long as it falls in the parameters of this world. And when you don't, that's when it becomes like, okay, this is again. That's why we say it's dumb. It's like unbelievable, because there is this history of this world, and they're doing themselves a disservice and everybody a disservice by ignoring it and just making up shit as they go along. You know what I'm saying? To fit their narrative, which is lazy writing.
But we need to make it right. That's exactly right. But we also need to make a distinction that what we're talking about is, people, even some of our commenters on the channel, complained, or I don't even know if it was a complaint against us, but they were like, some people just want an accurate representation of word for word of Tolkien in a movie form. And that it's not that it's not accurate point by point. Like Jackson's movie wasn't perfectly accurate, like, every single thing that Tolkien mentioned is in the Jackson movie. No. Jackson took tons of liberties, eliding some things in, re-emphasizing others, like
condensing the time that Frodo got the ring to the time he actually left the Shire.
Right,
I mean,
removing
by about
full sections,
by about 16 years and 11 months and 3 weeks.
So we don't. I'm not opposed to people adapting a book into a movie, taking huge liberties with that adaptation, but it just needs to feel like the book, or it needs to feel like Tolkien's world. It can take even like what we said, Adar is an invented character. I didn't mind that, because he was one character that actually felt like he belonged there. Yeah, like he felt like he kind of he wove his being into like Tolkien's world pretty well, because his history was explained through the Tolkien legendarium.
Yes, but here's the thing though too, and again, if you look at like what we talked about Sadok being like the oral historian, right, the historian of the group, right, and they live in like the Vales of the Anduin, which is where they lived. I
mean, there's huge traditions that they could have drawn from with Sadok being because there's the bardic tradition, and in Anglo-Saxon there's a scop or a shop. It's like a SCOP, which is like basically the Anglo-Saxon bard, and that would that was the oral, like Beowulf or whatever. These were the poets that would get up in front of the king and recite their
Epic of Gilgamesh,
right? Yes, and even in the Epic of Gilgamesh and all those old oral tradition epics, they would recite these from memory, and that would contain the history of the tribe, and the great deeds of the heroes of the tribe, or the gods of the tribe, or whatever, and so that would have been really cool had they done that, but obviously they didn't. So talking about the origin of hobbits, again, just like giving the hobbits that deep kind of ancestral lore and ancestral like origin, for it was in the 1601st year of the Third Age that the Fallowhide brothers Marcho and Blanco set out from Bree, and having obtained permission from the High King at Fornost, they crossed the Brown River at Branduin with a great following of hobbits. They passed over the bridge of stone bows that had been built in the days of the power of the North Kingdom, blah, 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 and they came down the Far Downs. And I think the point here is that they're settling the Shire. Is that right?
Yeah.
The great
and like so what happened is like
thus began the Shire reckoning, crossing the Brandywine Bridge, and year one of the Shire. Okay, so go ahead.
So what they were doing is they were looking for the ocean, right? And Marcho and Blanco said, "Do you smell it? We're here," right? And then when they woke up, they saw they weren't anywhere near the ocean, but they liked where they were, so they said to settle here, and then they.
This sounds like Brigham Young.
No, dude, it's
what is that from?
It's from Waiting for Guffman.
Oh, right. And they started to build stools.
Yeah, it's Blaine, Missouri. They found Blaine, Missouri instead of the Shire. Sorry.
Anyway,
but I just think a big, like, it wasn't like they went out like the way he described is funny. It's like not like they went out like by themselves or like, you know, it's like all these hobbits were like, yeah, we're gonna be there any day now. And like after, you know, after like 3 weeks, after like 4 days, we're like, oh, okay, this is far enough. Because how long did it take? How long did it take from the Shire to Bree? Like
right. Yeah, I'm thinking like this sounds like some great migration of tribes, but it's just like they just go down the street. I mean,
yeah, it was like 40 miles, whatever.
And not only that, but it's like it's the Shire. It's not like you're crossing deserts and mountains.
Yeah, I know.
It's like these rolling nice hills with streams.
Yeah, they just got tired. They're like, oh gosh,
oh god, not another elm
But then
tree.
again, yeah, then again though, maybe they were walking so like because like they had to walk twice as far because their legs were like 3 times as short.
Okay, so Marcho and Blanco, brothers, they're Followhide brothers. They found the Shire. They're the founders of the Shire, basically, right? And when they come to the Shire, that's year 1 of Shire reckoning, right?
Right.
Well, this Marcho and Blanco brothers that found the Shire is just has echoes that go back through the centuries because Hengist and Horsa were 2 Anglo-Saxon brothers, right? Who basically found in Anglo-Saxon mythology founded England.
Oh.
Right. So, you know, whether or not this has actual like historical, whether it's actually historically true is irrelevant. In Anglo-Saxon tradition, the Anglo-Saxon world in England was founded by these 2 brothers, Hengist and Horsa. Okay, so this is an echo of that. But even that, I think, was even the tale of Hengist and Horsa was an echo of an earlier founding by 2 brothers, Romulus and Remus, who founded Rome. Right, so it's kind of like this story of like 2 brothers or twin brothers founding your empire gives it that like real deep mythical legendary status. Like, oh, well, I think Romulus and Remus were suckled by a she-wolf. They founded the city of Rome, and which became the Roman Empire. And Hengist and Horsa, these 2 brothers, founded England, and Marcho and Blanco were these 2 brothers that founded the Shire. I don't think it's an accident that Tolkien gave it that kind of echo effect from prior legends and lore.
But what it does is it lends that air of familiarity to the history.
Yeah, so that when you're reading the Shire history, you think this sounds like real history of real tribal groups from European lore.
But you know what's funny? You know what's funny though? Like again, because they're hobbits and because of like, it was probably like the most polite like outing. I can like see them like just kind of strolling.
They woke up one morning and they walked down the road.
Yeah, Marcho and Blanco are part of the Lollipop Guild, and they're just like singing while they're like walking through. Here we are going through the Shire today, the Shire today, the Shire today.
Meanwhile, like there's like butterflies and daffodils. And
I know, like oh puppies. Sorry, getting all Wizard of Oz.
You're getting all Wizard of Oz. What's going on with you, buddy?
Yeah, I don't know.
What's going on, buddy?
Hey, brother.
Yeah. Okay. I think we've torn through most of concerning hobbits in the prologue. I thought we were going to get to Long Expected Party, but
let's leave that for the next one. I think we
might have to leave that for the next one. So, but this is going to be a new ongoing.
This is our thing, yeah. This is going to be our thing.
It's our new ongoing project. We're going to talk about all of Lord of the Rings, chapter by chapter. Sometimes we'll of course make departures, and we'll go through all kinds of tangents and totally irrelevant non sequiturs, and probably end up talking about hockey.
Of course, it's hockey season, buddy.
Or anything else under the sun.
Right.
But join us next time for another
Tune
exciting
in
episode.
next week. Will they talk about? Will they talk about Unexpected Party? Or are they gonna piss on Rings of Power again? Who knows?